So I have got just a couple more days left here before I go back to college. And I have to put a robot on this lathe right here before I go back. I've already done the rail here. I need to put a few more bolts on the other side, but it's basically ready to go. So this is our mount with the robot sits on, and I got to drill some 1/2-inch holes so I can mount it to the concrete. So it's looking like I gotta go 8 1/4 inches away from this plate right here out, and then the robot base is pretty much in line with the base of the chuck, or 33 inches from the back. It just has to be close. So it's looking like this mount, like this line, is pretty much in line with this cut in the frame here, and I know it's 8 1/4 back from the gray part right down there. So I think I could just set it up like that. I mean, I know that the center of this and the face line up, but I think this line is close enough just to go off of. Probably couldn't see my drawing very well, but basically this line right here kind of lines up with this, and then 4 dots for my holes, and it's square to the machine. And then when it's sitting there, the top will be in line with the chuck. They put this guard on it so you can't see in there. I know it's about 1/2 inch back, so just to make sure my alignment is right, I'm going to put this thing on. Alright, I got all the concrete bolts in. All I gotta do now is just tighten them up. So now that I got the base bolted and tight, I think I'm ready to put the robot on top of that base. Before I take it out of the box and I put it over there, I gotta go get my bolts so I can bolt it down right away. When setting these robots down, it's pretty crucial to think about this cable right here, knowing that this is the y-axis where this is right here. So it's pretty helpful if you have it going in a particular direction, because when you're programming later, for example, this y-axis should be lined up so that it is parallel with the spindles in this machine. It's not going to be perfect, but it's way easier to use it to move between points like that. So when you're putting these things down, you kind of want to think about this cable especially. So I made a little progress off camera, and I made the system of how I clamp it in location. And there are 3 holes on this, but I only used 2 of them. The first one is a 5/16 bolt with a nut on it, and it has a little spike on the front, and so this goes into one of those holes, and that nut gets driven up and it drives that spike down and locks it in. The second one here is just a little 1/4-inch bolt, and it just goes in the back side and it just drops all the way down, and there's a hole in the bottom plate and it just drops all the way through. Right now it's ready to plug in, but I don't want to get distracted with fun stuff. I have plenty of other stuff I need to do before I turn it on, so I'm just going to keep doing stuff. This is just a simple regulator off the Master, and I'm going to mount it right here where this bolt is. It'll make more sense later, but I typically set these to anywhere from 40 to 60 psi. The door cylinder really just doesn't need that much pressure to open and close, and any higher and it tends to just slam. We like to put this panel up here because it sits on the control box, but you gotta bend down to get it every time, so we found it easier just to mount it right to the side panel of the machine, and then you can just sit here and click and do all your stuff that you need to get done. I think I'm gonna turn the robot on, and I'm going to install the UR cap for the gripper and put it on the robot. You don't need air to install it, but I'm just going to test it after I get it installed. In order to install this, you're going to need your USB that sends with it. We have a PhD gripper. It's just a simple 3-jaw gripper. To install this, you're going to hit your hamburger menu and go to settings, and then you're going to go to your system, and then under system you'll see UR caps, and then you'll plug your USB in. It's going to show you it's plugged in. After that, you're going to hit your plus sign, and then USB disk, and then you hit the thing you want to install. You hit open. And now, in order for it to install, you just got to hit restart, and it's going to restart the controller. After it reboots, you can go into the installation tab, and you'll have your UR caps thing and PhDs right here. And and then you can select your gripper. So I got this one right here. After you've made your selection, you may need to restart it again for the tool center point to take place. If your payload and tool center point do not input, you can take your payload, which is 0.79 for this, and put it right here. And then take your TCP, which is 83.1 millimeter. Put it right here. Now this robot is currently in millimeters, but I like to switch over to inch. So I go over to the hamburger menu, and I hit Imperial right here, and then I hit apply and restart. Cool little tip for the UR10e series is that typically, in order to free drive, you have to hold the button on the back or hold the button on the screen. But if you route any output to an input, there's an option to switch it to a free drive. So then when you go into this I/O tab, then you can hit, say, output 3 or output 7, and it will turn on the input, and it will turn on free drive as well. So then you can go from this controller and move the robot with both hands. So this one's my digital input, and then this one's my digital output. So I just got a little loop there. And then in the installation tab, you can go to your I/O setup and go to your out, and I renamed this to free drive. And then on your in, you hit your action, and then you hit free drive, and it automatically renames it. See? So now if I hit this one, the other one turns on, free drive becomes active, and I can pull the robot around without hitting the button. To put on this GRT gripper, you have to take off these 3 bolts first, and then this will separate, and then you'll get access to these 2 to put on this with a locating pin. When you separate this, know that there's 2 O-rings in between here, and sometimes they like to stick. Just make sure you don't lose those guys. So in the box you'll find this pin. It can go in here either way. And that mounts up to that surface right there. Then you take the head and you see where the 2 O-rings go, and you put that on that side. After that, there's this silver cap right here. You can simply twist that off. And then you take your wire and you route it around, and there will be a locating piece on this, as long as a matching one, and it'll only go in one direction. And if you're clicking it and it's not working, that's because it hasn't loaded up. So go to your installation and then hit UR cap, and it will probably click once you open that folder. I typically like to save this as the home position because it's just nice and compact and it keeps it out of the way. To reset that home position, I go to my installation tab and general. Then there's a home. And home is as the 0 location, but the 0 position is always accessible through here, or you could type 0 into every tool position in the move tab. So instead I can edit this position and then set it as here, and so now this is now my home position. So this here's a 5.3 valve. Usually a 5.2 would be used. The difference here is when power is not being sent to either side, it is in full exhaust mode. This basically helps when the robot controller is not on. It's hard to open and close the door with a 5.2 because you have to unplug the air lines so that the cylinder can move back and forth. But with this, if power is not being sent, you can still open and close the door because it's an exhaust and it will exhaust both directions. Thinking I'm gonna put this guy right in here, and I'm gonna keep it to the left of the A because the door opens about right here. So if I put it right here, it will stay out of the way. Out of the regulator, I come into a T, and then I tee off to my 5.3 valve, and then this gets connected to a 4mm line, and that goes to the gripper on the robot. So now I have to put that 4mm line on the robot to the gripper there, and I have done this pretty often in the past. You just take zip ties and you put zip ties on these pieces right here, and then I loop it over, and then I go here, and then here, and then I just go down to the gripper. Now it's important to notice that normal to every single one of these blue caps is a joint. So there's a joint right here, there's one right here, and then there's one right here, and you don't want to put zip ties where those are. Like right here, you don't want to put a zip tie right there and squeeze that joint. And so you avoid those, and there's other places where you can put these and just link this line in. This is the position I like to set the robot in for operating on the machine. It makes it really easy to flip out so that you have a little bit extra reach. This position is also helpful because when I'm accessing the front and the back spindle and all my other moves, I'm nowhere near to the end limit on my joints, so I have plenty of range of movement in every direction. Right here I got my 4mm line, and I typically start by just plugging it in here and then tracking all the way around the robot and then going to the connection. Down here on this bottom joint, I leave a little bit of slack so this head can rotate around, but typically I don't rotate any farther this way. I just go back, and so I'll have plenty of slack there. Between these, I keep this stuff pretty tight. This is as much bend as this joint gets right here, and so this just is a little loose. Same thing between these two joints. This is just a little bit loose but pretty tight, and then that's where it exits. I tend to keep just a little bit of tab on these, so if I need to, I can pull them a little tighter later, but I typically don't ever have to mess with it. So I got my 4mm line here, and then I have my 1/4" line here, and I said this is the connection to this. Well, I learned this about 1/4" line. These two are perfect size, so 4mm slips right into 1/4" line. So I just put a little super glue around this edge, and I just shove it in there, and I haven't had one leak yet. So now that I have all the air stuff done for now, except for the air cylinder, I'll do that later. I'm gonna move to the I/O stuff, and I don't like wires going everywhere, and I like the stuff to be like tight, you know, together. I learned to start using Ethernet cable. There's 8 wires inside of this, and so that's basically 4 connections for your ground and your signal. So I have quite a bit of it here, and the first one I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go up the side of the machine, and I'm gonna go across to this arm over here, and then I'm gonna go down. Inside this control panel, there are 2 signals that I want. First of all, I want to connect to this green button so I can activate it with the robot. The second signal that I want is the light. I want connection to the orange light, which turns on when the program is stopped, and so I can tell the robot to change part. Getting that wire inside this arm is not too bad. I start by taking off these 3 panels, and then there's this little hole here that I push the wire into, and then I can pull it all the way through until I get to here. So now I got this wire routed all the way over to here, and now I have to pull enough out so that I can shove it down this tube. So I got my wire here, and it drops down about 2 foot past the control. I just got to take out these 2 screws and then open the back panel. So from the back side of the panel, this blue connector here is for the green button, and then if you follow the wire down for the light, they come down into that connector right there, but you can always just access them right there. These light wires are even labeled, so there's green, orange, and then red, and then this is your just power supply cable. There's not a whole lot of room in this tube, but I've done it before, so I just gotta fish it down. That wire will eventually go up along the top, and it'll drop down about right here so it can go into the box. So now I have the line wired across the top, and I'm using zip ties just to hold it in location in here. And so I'm just gonna put one more zip tie maybe about here, and then possibly one here, I don't know. And then I'm just gonna cut it so that when it hits the floor, you can move the controller around, kind of like around 2 foot radius or something. It's kind of hard to see them, but there are 3 plastic inserts in here, and I typically just pick one of them to push my wires through, and then I just push this thing out, and then I just pull it through. I've got here two 42-inch cylinders. They are 1 1/16 diameter. They're pretty long, but this is what I'm going to use to put on top of the door to open and close it. They didn't come with any foot mounts. I thought they would. I thought I selected it, but they didn't have any. So I have an alternative for that. I have quite a few of those same cylinders around the shop, and some of those brackets are just resting on steel. So I'm going to swap those brackets out with plastic ones, and then I'm going to use those two steel ones that I get on this cylinder. So I'm going to mount this backside to this bolt right here. I just unscrew it and I slide that under. And then on the other side, I mount the rod to that far end. But this cylinder is so long that I think I'm going to put a rest underneath this part bolted to that bolt so that it keeps it level, because right now it kind of is bent downwards and it's just too long to carry all the weight with this bracket. Right now I'm running these two air lines to the air cylinder, and I have them going up, just kind of going up the machine, but I am going to zip tie them to there and that bolt right there. Up here they're going to kind of spool around this direction, and then they're going to connect up to the cylinder. And then these two gray wires I have coming off are these magnetic sensors, and I put them on zip ties so we can shift them back and forth before we lock them in place. The first tube is just going to connect onto here, but the second one I'm going to zip tie up the cylinder and connect it up there. So I spent the rest of yesterday wiring up the rest of this stuff and securing those air lines. So I'll show you what I got. Down here I got two wires and two air lines coming up from the box. Also, I have connected up my two-way valve now. They go up the machine and they're zip tied in a couple places, and then up top they loop around, and the two sensors for the air cylinder are zip tied in place, and then the air line and that other sensor are zip tied up there. Up in front of the rod, I just made a simple bracket. The rod could not reach far enough, but the cylinder has enough stroke to open the doors, so I had to just make a bracket so it could bolt on. I also put this rail in position for the raw stock. It's not quite permanently where it needs to be, but it's pretty close. One thing about wiring these robots to a machine is that I would not do it if you don't feel comfortable with it. These machines are very sensitive. All CNC machines are, and if you tend to splice a wire that just won't like the voltage, and you'll run into all sorts of problems. The way we do it is we keep that wire intact and we use wire taps, and so we can just add another wire right beside it, and that's what we use going into the robot box. From there we have relays inside the box that separates the voltages from the machine and the robot. Now things like the two-way valve and the sensors on top of that air cylinder, those don't need relays. The robot can handle them just fine. I thought about adding programming onto this video, but I know it's long already, so I would rather do that separately if there's any interest. Also, some of this stuff is somewhat complicated, so if you have any questions, leave them and I'll get back to them.